Good evening, everyone. Today, of course, we will fight against advanced character of our world around us, like we try to do in every video on this channel. Today we will travel to ancient Egypt, but it won't be the journey to one of the most common historical periods of the ancient Egypt that one could think about for immediately, like Old Kingdom or New Kingdom, but it will be the period that started after the death of the last representative of Ramesside dynasty, the most powerful dynasty that perished quite badly. So this is the period that started after the death of the final representative of Ramesside dynasty, so Ramses the 11th, who died approximately 1085 BCE. And this work I would like to talk about, I will tell you the title later. The narrative of this work goes down to the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great, one should say like this. And this work is book entitled, actually its English translation is entitled The Twilight of the Ancient Egypt, and the author is the now retired Polish leading Egyptologist Karol Mysliwiec. The original title should be translated in a straightforward way, like The Lord of Two Countries, because the one who is interested in Egyptology and history of Egypt knows that ancient Egypt was always the sort of federation of two Egypts, upper and lower one. And important thing is to mention that this book is a very interesting one because it deals with the periods in which Egypt was not so much a dependent country, because it was ruled by foreign dynasties like Libyan dynasty, like Kushite dynasty, actually very interesting period, and later also Kushites were kicked out from Egypt by Assyrians, and later these events were used to Egyptians, the native Egyptians, who, using modern nomenclature, we would call them Egyptian nationalists, to regain the power in Egypt and start 26th dynasty, so-called dynasty from the Sais dynasty, because the representatives of this 26th dynasty, royal dynasty, they were coming from the city of Sais. And this was the last period of the Egyptian independence that ended up together with Persian conquest, and later after Persian conquest we had a very short, about 60 years period of Egyptian independence with few pharaohs, so Egyptian kings. Later again second Persian conquest, but 11 years after, Alexander the Great enters Egypt and starts the very interesting period, which is not covered in this book, the Hellenistic period of the Ptolemaic dynasty, period of the history of Hellenistic Egypt, one of my favorite, but I will talk about it in different video. And why I like this book? Because one can learn a lot, not only about history of very often neglected late period of Egyptian history, very tragic very often, full of distractions, full of disappointments, full of invasions, but also full of changes in the art, culture, upon the foreign influences. Especially my favorite is the Kushite dynasty, because thanks to the representatives of Kushite dynasty, Egypt experienced the revival, cultural revival, because Pianki, the black leader of Kush, the kingdom, state situated in Nubia, came to Egypt as a restorator, rebuilder of Egyptian culture and state, and despite being completely black, he said, "I'm the Egyptian," And he indeed was. Because at those days, Nubians were practicing the purest version of Egyptian culture and rituals. Why? Because in the 15th century BC, Pharaoh Thutmose III, he is called by some historians the Napoleon of Egypt, conquered many lands in Western Asia, but also in Africa, on the south from Egypt, between the first and fourth cataract. And the Egyptians were ruling these territories for long. First, the first people coming were military settlers with families, later some officials and also traders, adventurers, but briefly Egyptians, representatives of different layers of Egyptian society. And this conquest, started in the 15th century by Thutmose III, just planted the cultural seed of Egyptian culture that in the half of 8th century BC came actually beautifully germinated there in these lands on the south from Egypt, on the south from the first cataract. Later, these vital forms came back to Egypt, started the last renaissance of Egyptian culture, which later helped the Egyptian nationalists, using modern terms, so representatives of the Saïd dynasty, 26th dynasty, regain Egypt and save a lot from Egyptian heritage for us. Very beautiful period, very beautifully described in this book, which also has, luckily, like not so many books written by Polish specialists, it's quite good English translation. And the very important thing is to mention that not only political history is covered in this book, but also culture, also a description of some social issues, and this book also gives broader perspective on ancient Egypt itself. Definitely worth reading. Gives many open questions, but also pushes a person who is interested in the history of this country and in the history of people what's really important for the preservation of cultural and national national identity. Have a nice evening, all the best, take care, bye. The Twilight of the Ancient Egypt by Karol Mysliwiec.